Hey everybody, Courtney here, New Pragmatic. Thank you so much for taking a moment out of your day to join me for this short video on how to use GitHub. Now, in a prior video, we were going over the basics of Git, and while those are very important, those alone won't open up the opportunities that are truly afforded by version control, nor will they protect you from disaster that comes when you've combined both Git, which is our version control of choice, with a cloud platform like GitHub. With the ability to push your work to an online central repository, you vastly expand your world of opportunities and position yourself to be able to work with anybody who understands how to utilize Git and GitHub. Before we can truly unlock the potential of using GitHub, I want to dive into how it works, and luckily it's pretty straightforward. You push work from your machine utilizing Git to GitHub. That's basically making a copy of everything that's in a given directory or folder and placing it into a repository that exists on GitHub. These repositories can be either public or private, and you have individual control over who has access to either of those. So you can have a mix of different project types inside of GitHub. Now, as you make changes, you commit and push your new work from your computer to that repository. If you begin working with others, they can push updates to your repository as well. And you have control of whether they can immediately update your repository or if it has to wait for approval from you or one of your colleagues. Finally, if the projects that you've pushed to GitHub aren't too complex, you can turn that work into a website that's hosted right there on GitHub. Now, while you're somewhat limited by how far you can take that, it's quite common to host your personal portfolio just using GitHub. I want to take a second and talk about the requirements that are necessary to really get the most out of this video. First, you're going to need to have Git installed on your machine. If you have any questions about how to do that, we have a prior video that shows you all the ins and outs of getting Git installed on your machine. Also, you're going to need a GitHub account, and I'll walk you through how to do that. We'll also need a repository created inside of that new GitHub account. And then finally, you need the knowledge of how to push from your machine to GitHub. And we're going to cover all of that in this short video. In this episode, we are going to be splitting our time between terminal and a web browser. So arrange your windows accordingly so you can easily follow along. The first thing I want you to do is just make sure you have Git installed on your machine. I'm going to do that by typing in Git version, and as you can see, Git's installed. Again, if you don't have Git installed on your machine, please go back and watch the prior video on getting up and running with Git. With that out of the way, let's get your new account set up at github.com. Doing this is pretty straightforward. You'll need to have a username, an email address, and a password. I'm going to go ahead and create a new account. Once you've made it past the initial sign-up screen, understand that there's 3 additional steps that are required to complete your account for GitHub. The other thing that I want you to be aware of is sometimes if you're going through this process, the create an account button is actually underneath, just outside of the view. So don't forget to click the create an account button once it is illuminated. As you can see here, you have the opportunity to choose what type of subscription that you want. I personally have a pro account, but for our purposes, I'm just going to go ahead and sign up with the free account. GitHub wants to be helpful. So in this third step, if you're just getting started, be sure to click none, I don't program at all, so that you can get all the helpful tooltips as you go. For the rest of us who have experience here, that's not going to be necessary. GitHub's going to ask for you to verify your email address. Take every security precaution that you can with your GitHub account. It is your home away from home for all of your projects. Once you finish signing up for your GitHub account, you're going to arrive at a dashboard that looks a lot like this. Ultimately, you will begin managing your projects from here, so let's go ahead and get one started. And to do that, I'm now going to move over to Terminal so I can begin creating a project that we will eventually connect with GitHub. For this, I'm going to be in my projects folder, and if you're not completely sure about where to put your projects, be sure to go back and watch the setting up your machine video that was recently released. To get started, we're going to go ahead and set up a new project inside of Terminal that we will connect with GitHub. So let's shift over to there now. Back on our local machine, we're going to create a project really quickly that we'll use to push to GitHub. I'll make this one for a new client that happens to be a pet supply company. Okay, so as you can see, I created a new directory for the project, which is called Preppy Puppy, and I've thrown in an index.html and a Readme. This is clearly very minimal, but that's all we need for this example. Back on GitHub, I've signed into the account that I normally use. This will give you a sense of what your dashboard will look like once you begin populating it. We're now going to create a new repository, and there's a couple of different ways you could do that. You could click New over here by Repositories, or you could click the plus and select New Repository from the drop-down. When you're creating a repository, understand that the repository has to have a unique name, and no two repositories inside of GitHub that are associated with your account can have the same name. I tend to name my repositories after the projects that they're associated with. Now, I could add a description. I could also choose whether the project is public or private. I could initialize it with a README, but as you know, I already have created a README. I could also add a gitignore file, which tells GitHub what files to not pay attention to. More on that in a bit. And then I could also add a license. I'm not going to worry about any of those options right now. We're simply going to create our repository. Now that you've created your repository, GitHub will provide you with some helpful next steps to take to connect your local project with the online repository. If you know Git, some of these options are really familiar. Obviously, git init, git add, git commit are all options that we have already walked through in creating new projects in earlier videos. There's a couple of new options here that are presented that are really important. One is git remote add origin. This is the line that you'll utilize in Terminal to connect your local project with this specific repository. It's going to GitHub, it's in a folder called DesignHog, that's your user folder, and then the project repository is called preppypuppy.git. Each of these are unique. If you had the same name on another repository, this would break, and that's why you can't have two repositories named the exact same thing. And then the last pit, and you'll use this over and over again as you create and update your projects, git push origin master. This is what you will use every time you've made a commit and you're ready to push it from your local machine to GitHub. There's one other that you'll use, it's called Git Pull. With GitHub, you will sometimes push information to it and you will pull information down from it. But it is this push and pull dynamic that allows you to collaborate with others. So let's go back to our project and run through these steps from git init to git push to connect our project from our local machine to GitHub. And just like that, you've pushed your work to GitHub. To make sure that our work is actually showing up on GitHub, let's go back over to GitHub and hit refresh. You can see that once you have successfully pushed to GitHub, those hints and instructions go away and the project now appears. To simulate what it's like to work with another party, I'm going to do a little bit of minor editing here on GitHub, and to do that, I'm going to edit the README file. Here I'm simply going to click on it, and I will click the edit this file pencil. And I want to make it very clear, normally you're not going to be doing a lot of editing on GitHub. At most, this is a really good place to read through content and look for typos. But for the most part, you're going to be doing all of that editing using like Visual Studio Code. So we've entered a little bit of text. I will commit the changes. And as you can see, this text is now showing up inside of that README file. I'll go back to our project, and you can see update README is now in the commit message field for the README file. Index.html has create index.html file for its commit message. You can also see when these were committed. This was committed 3 minutes ago. This was committed 10 seconds ago. To see what it's like working with changes that aren't currently on our local machine, let's go back into our Preppy Puppy project, and I'm going to open this in VS Code. Now, as we stated before, this is a really simple project. There's literally nothing in the index.html file, and as you can see, there's nothing showing up in this README file. I'll show you why there's nothing showing up in just a moment, but I want to make a really quick change to this index.html file. And to do that, I'm just going to enter some tags, and I'm going to save that file. I'll check the status, and as you can see, the index.html file has been updated but is not currently ready for commit. I will add these changes for commit. And now it would appear that we are ready to push. So I'm going to enter git push origin master, and then we get this error. Our attempt to push has been rejected. It's really important to read the error messages when they show up on screen. They're really helpful, and they'll tell you exactly what you need to do to fix the issue. Here it says, error, failed to push some refs to our URL. Updates were rejected because the remote contains work you do not have locally. This is usually caused by another repository pushing to the same ref. You may want to integrate the remote changes, e.g. Git Pull before pushing again. So, because I have not pulled in those changes that were made to the README file, GitHub is not allowing me to push up the changes I made to the index.html until I accept those changes that are already on the remote repository. So I will say git pull origin master, because I want to pull on the branch, and right now we're on the master branch. We will get more into branches in a little bit. I can see that one merge was made, and it was that a README was added to the project, and it says +1. It's just saying a very small change was added. The good news here is that there are no conflicts. A conflict is when the local file and the remote file are at issue with one another. We'll cover conflicts in another video, but just know that when you're pulling information over, occasionally there are going to be conflicts. In this case, there isn't a conflict, so I can simply say git push origin master, and away it goes. If we want to check and make sure that that went properly, we can simply come over and refresh our project on GitHub. And now if we look at our index.html file, that very simple structure is there. And of course, that README file is there as well. And that's it. You've successfully created a project, created a GitHub account, created a repository on GitHub, connected that local project with your remote repository, dealt with changes on both sides, pulled in the changes that were made to the repository on GitHub, and pushed everything, bringing it back in sync together from your local machine. And just like that, we're done. If you like this content and you want more of it, please click subscribe. If this was helpful, give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, I'm Courtney for New Pragmatic. I hope to talk to all of you soon.